Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
And we're back, and we have a great topic for today. And something, we've talked about RAG and a couple times on the show now, but we're going to actually talk about it a little bit more about, I kind of use the title RAG that survives production, but I want to talk about the productization and improvements and that kind of iteration loop a little bit more today. And for that, we have Adam Kamor, co-founder and head of engineering at Tonic AI. Adam, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. It's the day before Thanksgiving. We're urgently getting our house ready, but otherwise good.
Yeah, and just so everyone out there, like you mentioned, it is. We're both in Eastern time. We're in the same time zone for this one. It is like 5 o'clock on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So I don't know about you, man, but this is my last call. Like after this, I'm done.
That's right. I got friends coming over tonight. I'm ready to check out.
All right. So why don't we start? Give everyone a quick introduction, if you don't mind, please, Adam.
Certainly. So my name's Adam. I am the co-founder and head of engineering at a company called Tonic, or Tonic.ai. Tonic AI helps customers deal with sensitive data, typically by de-identifying or synthesizing that data, whether it's data sitting in your application database in a data warehouse, or even unstructured data that comes up in a lot of RAG and fine-tuning use cases.
Nice. Yeah, and so let's talk about that. Let's dig into the RAG side of it for a bunch here. I'm sure we'll bring in those other pieces as we go. So let's kind of start with kind of the I'll use the customization sources and types. Like everyone's heard of RAG at this point, but then everyone kind of goes, oh, well, there's RAG and there's, MCP connections to a SQL database. And then there's like, oh, if I want to customize something, I could pre-train it. I could post-train it. There's fine tuning. Let's first of all split that up a little bit and help everyone with that. How does an organization go about deciding what is the best path if they want to customize an LLM?
So to me, I always would advise an organization to do the simplest thing they can that works. And I'll give what in my mind is kind of like the easiest thing to the hardest thing. But maybe based on someone else's expertise, they'd flip it around even. But here's Adam's view of the world at the moment. I think the easiest thing that you can try first is just trying to prompt an LLM. Okay. Maybe you prompt it with just a question. Maybe you're also putting into the prompt all of the data that LLM might need to answer the question. Right. But prompting an LLM, probably the easiest thing you can do. If it doesn't work on one LLM, try it on another. We use a lot of, few shot or zero shot like LLM prompting in some of our products. And we find that some LLMs work very well and some don't. Even like the top of the line models from the large foundries out there, some work well for some use cases and others work well for other use cases. I think if you have to go beyond that, I think a RAG-like approach can be useful in certain situations. I think that adds a lot more complexity. You need data pipelines. You got to figure out how you're actually going to chunk your data, figure out what data is actually relevant. What are your retrieval mechanisms? Like there's more thinking that goes on all of a sudden, right? And then I think if you have to go beyond that, typically you'll see, organizations start to think about fine tuning. And fine tuning is when you actually take like an off the shelf, like base model, maybe like a Gemma 3 billion parameter model from Google. And then you actually train it additionally with your own data. And that's even harder to do, in my opinion. And essentially, so you start with the easy, then you go to the hard. And you know what I'm ignoring though in all of this? How do you know when actually what you're building is good enough? Like, are the answers even good? So that's like a whole other topic that you have to kind of nail down first.
Yes, and we're absolutely going to talk about that. And so yeah, think of it as like, okay, how do you do it? And then does it work is two very, very separate things.
Yeah.
And how do you improve on that quality over time as well? But let's kind of peel back the next layer in RAG then, if you will. Like I feel like RAG kind of came on the scene as like, okay, frontier models came on the scene, they were amazing. And then everyone kind of realized, oh, wait a second, I want it to be specific to mine. I don't want it to be just off the shelf and general purpose. And so then everyone was like, oh, there's this RAG thing. And everyone was like, oh, this is the savior for organizations that really want to customize and do fine tuning, but maybe they don't have data scientists and they can't do fine tuning and they don't want to do additional training because it's really time consuming. It's really expensive. And like you mentioned, hey, you might break the model. Right. And so, but then it kind of went through this kind of trough of disillusionment, if you will, of like, okay, I got to take the data. I got to clean the data. I got to embed the data. I got to, do all these other, like it wasn't as easy as a SQL lookup. Right?
No, certainly not.
And so like, what's your thoughts on kind of the evolution of RAG and the challenges it faces? Let's talk about that next.
Interesting. I think I let you. I mean, I'm not sure who came up with this term. Maybe it was you. The trough of disillusionment is a good one.
It's a Gartner term. I don't claim it by any means, but every frickin' technology we've ever talked about in our industry, everyone thinks it's awesome, and then everyone thinks it sucks.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, that's what happened with RAG, where you're right. It's like, okay, if you want mediocre results, and again, how do you evaluate what's mediocre and what's good? But if you want mediocre results, you can get them with RAG, I think, relatively pain-free, relatively easily. But like, if you're trying to do something in production and you want it to it's going to be a customer-facing experience, or like there's dollars on the line, that all of a sudden takes a lot more work. I think like almost all things data science, a lot of that works on the data prep side. And the reality is like organizations are almost never starting with like clean data. And clean could just mean, clean is the opposite of messy. Clean could mean that, okay, the data is actually filled with like PHI and we can't use it. Clean could mean a lot of things. But like, if you want a good system, RAG in particular here, you gotta get clean data first. And I think that's really challenging for organizations. And that's like not even a RAG thing, right? Like organizations always struggle with that. But it affects RAG in particular. God, what was the second question you asked? I think it was like, repeat your second question. I forgot.
Yeah. So think of it as like, what's the state of it, and then the challenges that you have to get out of it, right? Like what's the evolution, right? That we've gone through.
I think the evolution and the challenges are all about the trough of disillusionment, and it's all related to getting clean data. Where do I see RAG now? I hope this isn't controversial. I am seeing less organizations take advantage of RAG systems. I am seeing organizations either just using, like just prompting their LLM or fine tuning. I think the big promise of RAG was it was essentially like it allowed you to get around the context window limitation, right? Like that was the whole point of it. Like an LLM can only kind of like handle so many tokens at once in its memory. Well, with RAG, you kind of get around that because you're only ever giving it what it needs to answer the question. Models are getting better at context window sizes, like they're larger. I think you're finding that for use cases outside of essentially search, where you want to ingest everything, the prompting is mostly good. And then when it's not, people fall back to fine tuning, which is challenging but can yield like incredible results. Like we've seen it ourselves in what we build. We fine tune a lot of different models. And I mean, we can do really incredible things with fine tuning now. It takes some muscle to kind of get into it. But once you're there, you're there. So that's kind of my controversial opinion. I know the whole episode's about RAG, and I'm saying
no. But it's funny because it kind of echoes what I'm seeing. Like when Jen and I first came on the scene, I again, numbers right off the top of my head when I was first talking to customers is like, I'm willing to bet you. And this is, bigger enterprises. I would say like 80% of them chose to go down the RAG path because they were like, you know what?
It's all I don't have data.
I don't have data scientists, or I don't have the GPUs. I'm not doing fine tuning. Like full
100%.
stop, right?
Yeah.
But then I think the more people that tried it, the more challenges they face. But maybe let's because we've been kind of hinting around at it. Let's talk about that validation piece for a second, right? Like, how does an organization okay, I set all this up, I did everything. How do you know it works? Like, how is that accuracy measured and validated, right? Because like how do you know if it's hallucinating? How do you know if it's, in context and a quality answer? Like tell everyone a little bit about the measuring stick, if you will, of all of this.
I don't have, and look, what I'm going to say, it's not even a RAG specific problem. It's how do you evaluate in general the output from large language models, whether it's through an LLM directly or through RAG, right? In my mind, I've seen a lot of like open source solutions come and go here. I don't think any of them really nail it because it's a very hard thing to nail. Like if you want to like automatically evaluate the quality of answer from an LLM, okay, well, you're going to have to use another LLM to do it. Okay. Well, unless you're going to sit there and have humans do it, right? You can have human evaluators come in. You can do the typical, scientific approach of you sample your outputs, you kind of score them, and then you track this over time. But that takes bodies and time, and it costs a lot of money. I've seen a lot of automated approaches come and go, but they all rely on like having an LLM evaluator. And I don't buy it, right? Like you want to evaluate one LLM with another, like, okay, if you don't trust the first one, why do you trust the second one? Do you need a third LLM to evaluate the second one? Like where does it end, right? It's like, turtles all the way down.
Yes.
Yeah. My favorite song at the moment, by the way.
I love that.
Yeah, that's right. So, I don't have a good answer there. I think it's an incredibly challenging problem. And here's an analogy. Like, our company builds a lot of NER style models. These are models for identifying entities in text. And customers always ask us, all right, well, how accurate are the models, right? And I can tell them how well we perform on our own evaluation data, but that's not really relevant because their data is going to be different than our evaluation data. So I always tell them the same thing. Like, look, go take a sample of your data, annotate it yourself by hand, compare it to our output that we generate, and then you can compute, like essentially accuracy or F1 scores. You have to do the equivalent for large language model outputs, in my opinion. It's really the only way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk real quick about, you have an open source project out there, Tonic Validate. So what is it? Where does it fit in this stack? Tell everyone a little bit about that.
So, look, Tonic Validate is one of these solutions for evaluating large language models. Think of it as a framework that can plug into like an LLM output, and then you can run your own scoring functions over the output. The scoring functions can be like they're you get to define your own in Python, right? Like, so you could have a scoring function like, does the LLM say thank you? And it returns a 1 or a 0, yes or no, right? So it can be very trivial things like that. And then it can get to the very complex of like actually including these LLM evaluators. And it has uses, right? It's you can use it to track trends over time. That's really like the value I see in them. I'm reluctant to say, hey, like the absolute scores you're seeing imply a value. I think it's more about like the tracking over time and what you can get from that, because you can actually see trends. So that's where like I think the value is in a solution like Tonic Validate. And then there's many other open source solutions like on the market. Of course, as I say that, I'm completely blanking on some of the others I've seen that I really like. And there are really good ones out there if you want to kind of monitor these trends over time. I'm not trying to push validate. So, there's many options out there. But I'd be wary of looking just at the absolute values here and instead kind of look for trends.
Sure. And I think there's another vector here that I wanted to talk to you about as well, because I feel like AI these days gets really talked about in two ways: accuracy and then price, right? Like whether it's price per token or token per watt or all these other things, right? And but what that really ultimately boils down to, it's like the whole idea of like, okay, but why? And then you keep asking multiple whys to get to the true source of the thing. I think the idea here though is more about ROI and efficiency for the enterprises in particular, and so like, yes, there's accuracy and yes, there's performance, and there's even like how are you going to measure ROI here? But is it just cost, or is it like, is there risk? Is there compliance? Like, tell everyone a little bit about how you think about and how you talk to organizations when they kind of ask the ROI questions.
That's interesting. I always, so our solutions, like the products that Tonic sells, they're basically used in one of two ways. They can be used in our public cloud, just a typical SaaS offering. And then some of our enterprise customers, they self-host our solutions. So, our solution is available via a set of Docker containers, and then organizations can deploy them in Kubernetes or EKS or AKS, like really however they want to deploy it. Everything runs, air-gapped, isolated, etc. And our solutions also will need to deploy a lot of large language models, right? Not a lot of large language models, but typically there's like one LLM that we can ship with. And there's always these conversations around cost, and always these conversations around, okay, well, like, what kind of GPU do I need? And is my cloud going to give me access to it? Like, I've had a really hard time getting GPU access on certain clouds lately. I'm not going to say which ones because it's not nice, but I've had a lot of trouble on some and not a lot of trouble on others. So, look, to your question, I think for organizations, it really depends on like what the LLM is going to be used for. Like if it's an LLM that's going in and like performing back office operations for an enterprise, and it's like reducing headcount or kind of like reducing like, the amount of humans that are required for certain tasks, and the ROI is there and it's clear and it's present, right? It's like, oh yeah, I'm saving X a year on headcount by, automating this solution. Like that's going to speak for itself. And then there's other cases where like the ROI isn't well defined because like what you're getting out of this isn't well defined. Like, okay, if you put a new chat widget on your website so that customers can ask questions to it, that's not clear at all. That can be harder to measure the ROI, I should say. And then they start wondering about these things. But like typically what our customers use us for, and when they're deploying our models, it is to clean data so that they can go train the models that eventually they'll have this ROI conversation about. So I actually normally come in like that ROI decision's already been made. They know they want to go build a model or build a RAG system to do something, but they got to clean the data first. So then they come to us for that. And I'm kind of in a way divorced from that initial ROI conversation.
Yeah. And so it's interesting to say that also. And it's also when you're talking about like, okay, because I was going to ask you about the security around all of this, and where and how does security fit into all of this. But I think your idea there is like, well, I mean, at its very core, it's all about cleaning the data, and cleaning the data makes it secure. Right. If I use that.
Certainly.
Is that true? And like, where and how does synthetic data versus real data come into play? Right. And like, tell me a little bit more about that.
I don't want to use the word secure here. I'm going to use the word private instead, which they're not exactly the same, but they're pretty close, right? I think a lot of like, having privacy. Well, I think they're just very close. I think that's clear. So what our product does is it typically can make data less sensitive than it originally is. Like so many organizations out there, so many enterprises, they have incredibly valuable, like unstructured data just sitting around. But it's practically radioactive in terms of like how much, either PHI or PII it contains. And for those that don't know, PII is personally identifiable information. And then PHI is like the equivalent of that, but when there's health involved, like healthcare data that falls under HIPAA if you're in the United States. So, this unstructured data, it has tons of like, PII and PHI, and it can be typically very hard to like kind of like identify it and remove it. So then you can't use the data, right? Like I can't go train a model on data covered under HIPAA and then use that model, right? You have to go through specific processes to remove any identifiable information of patients before you really use the data for anything, as a matter of fact, right? So that's typically where we come in. And you're right. Like it's like always a conversation with like the privacy teams, compliance teams, security, in order to ensure that like this solution is actually going to like make the data safe and usable and compliant. And it can be very tricky with unstructured data, but that's typically, where we focus.
Sure. That makes perfect sense. And actually, I think that's actually a really good spot to kind of close us out for today as well. Kind of final closing question on that, Adam.
Sure.
If anyone out there is interested, like what's good next steps or what's a good way for them to get started if they wanted to kind of dig in deeper?
So let's say one of your listeners is curious and interested in like, how can I sanitize or clean data so I can go train a model on it? Maybe the data is sensitive or it contains healthcare information or what have you. You can certainly start by exploring some open source options. There's solutions out there like Presidio and Spacey, which are free. They're open source. They're essentially, NER models that can identify sensitive words and phrases and names within bodies of text. And then you can figure out how you want to de-identify, tokenize, or synthesize these pieces of text. If that doesn't work, then there's vendors that you can look at as well. Like I'll put a stake in the ground, and I'll say that like our solution is significantly better than any of your open source models that are kind of out there at the moment. It's also better than large language models for sanitizing text. You'll find that actually most large language models aren't great at finding PII, which is interesting. You think they'd be very good at it. But in fact, they're not, and they're also relatively expensive and slow. Like, if you're a large insurance company and you have trillions of words of data you need to sanitize, using like an LLM for that isn't really a feasible thing to do. So you'll need to come up with something else. But I'd always in general start open source, see what you can do, and then if they want to chat more, come to our website tonic.ai, and then we can help you kind of explore some other paths as well.
Fantastic. I appreciate that, Adam. That's a great summary. And thank you very much for your time today. And for everyone out there, thank you for your time as well. Thank you for listening this week. And on behalf of Brian and myself, thank you very much for listening. And if you enjoy the podcast, wherever you get your podcast, if you can, leave us a review and certainly tell a friend. And we're always open to feedback as well. show@thecloudcast.net. And again, thank you everyone for listening, and we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.